Okay, I'll make this as quick as I can. We're looking at the mid-sagittal section of the brain, and let me go over these parts. Alright, so let's start with, this is the cerebellum. This whole thing is the cerebellum. Notice that it has two large branches. Looks kind of like a tree. Those two branches, if you'll look at the grain of the cerebellum, they merge into a fissure called the primary fissure. You can kind of see how it wants to separate right there. So this is the cerebellum primary fissure. This is one of the cerebral hemispheres. It's the right cerebral hemisphere. And it is not connected to the left cerebral hemisphere except by this thin white line here, which is the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum. The front of the corpus callosum, the anterior part, is called the genu. The posterior part here has a special name called the splenium. And then the bottom area is the fornix. Fornix. Underneath the corpus callosum, you have an empty space called a ventricle. There are two ventricles that are lateral to each other. This one is the right lateral ventricle, and the left lateral ventricle is on the other section of the brain. There is a membrane, which you cannot see here on this one. There's a little tiny part of it. There's a membrane that separates the two lateral ventricles. So your left and right lateral ventricles are the first and second of 4 ventricles. These ventricles have cerebrospinal fluid in them, which moves. The third ventricle is in this groove right here, and it actually comes around this circular thing, which is the thalamus. This is the thalamus. So the third ventricle goes around it like this, ending about right here. So it's this right here. And then there's a little bit of a groove here that leads to a bigger groove. That groove right there is the cerebral aqueduct. Cerebral aqueduct. And as the spinal fluid, the cerebrospinal fluid, moves past that, it's going underneath the cerebellum into the 4th ventricle. That's the last one. Then you can see this dark line. That will be a small tube going the length of the spinal cord so that the cerebrospinal fluid can be circulated down all the way down the spinal cord. Now let's come back. In cross-section, you can see many of the things that you could see from the ventral view. This is the spinal cord. You have a hump here that goes from here to here. It's a bigger, it's under the cerebellum. That is the medulla oblongata. This smaller hump that is a little bit more prominent, that is the pons. Pons. Okay. You can see right here, that's the mammillary body that is cut in cross-section, so you can see half of it here. And the same thing with the optic chiasma right here. You can see these from the ventral view if you turn it like this. So there's the optic chiasma and the mammillary body. Alright, so let's see what else we have. So this is the thalamus. Everything anterior to the pons, there's the pons, so everything anterior to the pons but posterior to the optic chiasma and under the thalamus is considered hypothalamus. It's a general area, a hypothalamus. The pineal gland is cut in this pretty well, actually. Here is half of the little gland. I love that little gland. And it has a little stalk on it that's holding it on, and that's called the habenula. I love that. Habinula. Okay. You can also see these things right here, that you were able to view from the midbrain view. It is the superior colliculus and inferior colliculus. The inferior colliculus is right above the cerebral aqueduct. Okay, let's go back up to the corpus callosum here. The first gyrus above the corpus callosum, this one right here, you can see it. That is called the cingulate gyrus. The cingulate gyrus. Looking at the humps here, the humps or the hills, they are gyri or gyrus, is singular. And then the valleys are the sulci or sulcus, singular. And you can get up underneath this membrane. See, I'm underneath it now. That is the arachnoid mater, which is the middle membrane. It's in between the dura mater, which fourth period you got to see, and above the pia mater. So there's 3 meninges. Those are brain membranes. Now, it's kind of hard to put these things together and make it look any good, but I'll give it my best shot. So you have these 2 cerebral hemispheres, the longitudinal fissure, the transverse fissure separates the cerebellum, which is coordination and movement, from the cerebral hemispheres. Transverse fissure. If you open the midbrain area, I'm going to have to hold it, so yeah. Okay, so you can see the 2 top humpy things. Those are the superior colliculi. Trying to get them to be aligned. And then directly underneath them are the inferior colliculi. But all together, there are 4, and together they're called the corpora quadrigemina. Corpora quadrigemina. Now, if you look very carefully, you can see above the superior colliculi, you can see the pineal gland just kind of poking, hanging out there. The entire area that includes the corpora quadrigemina and this whole midbrain, it's the roof of the midbrain, basically, is what it's called. Let's do the ventral view. All right, so in the ventral view, you have your olfactory bulbs. Get resituated here. Okay, olfactory bulbs, and those would go and connect with the olfactory nerves, sensory receptors for smell. Here's the olfactory tract. It's that white line. There's one on each side. This is the optic tract on both sides, and where it crisscrosses here, it's called the optic chiasma. Each one of these, it would go like this all the way to an eye, or like this to an eye. Directly inferior to the optic chiasma is a little hole. That hole used to have a stalk, like a stalk, that's called the infundibulum. The infundibulum, and it held on the pituitary gland. If you were in fourth period, you might actually still have some of that stalk, and it won't just be the hole that it left behind. But that was special because y'all had the dura mater and got to remove it yourself. All right, so if you go just posterior to the infundibulum, then you've got a mammillary body right here. This one's kind of falling apart a little bit, and it's not perfectly cut in half here, as you can tell, but it's still very close. And then once you go optic chiasma, and then infundibulum, mammillary body, and then you're going to go to either side here. Both sides here, they are called cerebral peduncles. I mean, that's a funny word. Cerebral peduncles. They're just the humpy parts. Now, I'll show you in just a second, but some of you will have some nerves right here called oculomotor nerves. Oculomotor nerves, but I'll show you what they look like. This hump from here to here is the pons, and then and that's a very prominent one, and then from here to where it evens out is the medulla oblongata, and then you've got the spinal cord. The last thing that I'm going to point out to you is the trochlear nerve, and I can't remember if this one had it or not. It sure does. So usually you can only find it on one side, and it's really small. I thought I saw it. Yeah. Okay, it's right. If I can get it. It looks like a little worm. Let's see if you can see it. Yeah, you can see it. Underneath it with my probe. That's the trochlear nerve. All of the dark stuff, look at the vessels right there. That's pretty cool looking. Huh. An aneurysm is one of those busts. That would suck. All right. I think that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed your Blackboard lesson with the sheep brain. And just, as a funny little thing, if you go like this, look at that. Hold on. Oh, I can't see it. You know what that looks like? That looks like a butt. All right. See y'all tomorrow. Bye.